The missions that never came home, some of the most important missions in space history, ended with no parades at all. They ended with sealed reports, closed-door meetings, and wreckage scattered across oceans and frozen steppe. They ended with capsules brought back under tarps, not flags. Missions that, in the official record, returned to Earth, but never truly came home. This is what we know. For every triumphant splashdown broadcast live, for every perfect landing replayed in slow motion, there is another trajectory that ended as a crater or a cloud. A Soyuz capsule that hit the ground at roughly 140 kilometers an hour, its parachute a twisted knot of fabric. A shuttle that disintegrated in front of millions, turning a bright winter sky into an expanding trail of debris. A capsule fire that killed its crew before the Saturn rocket beneath them ever lit. The part that matters is that none of these were pure bad luck. Inside control rooms and design bureaus, engineers, flight controllers, and cosmonaut trainers had already filled binders with warnings. Soyuz 1 launched in 1967 with more than 200 known design issues documented. Apollo 1's pure oxygen cabin, its inward opening hatch, its flammable wiring had been questioned in memos long before the fire. Challenger's O-rings had already leaked on cold mornings. Columbia's foam strikes were recorded on earlier flights and quietly filed as accepted risk. Publicly, the language stayed calm. A major malfunction, an anomaly during ascent, a loss of cabin pressure, the kind of phrases that sound clinical, almost routine. Privately, depending on who you ask, the language was very different. We knew this could happen. We were overruled. We were told not to talk about that test result again. In the Soviet program, some reports were classified so tightly that even other cosmonauts only heard rumors. A parachute that never opened, a valve that cracked open during re-entry and turned a returning spacecraft into a silent vacuum chamber. So how does a mission that passes every checklist, every simulation, still end in catastrophe? How does a spacecraft that clears all the formal reviews become a tomb in orbit? Or a field of fragments spread across Texas, Kazakhstan, or the Atlantic? Is that coincidence? Or the predictable outcome of political pressure, rushed design, and ignored red flags? This is what we don't. Agencies such as NASA and the Soviet space program chose carefully what to reveal, what to soften, and what to bury. The word unexplained appears in post-flight reports only when the alternative is worse. The chance of some of these failures being truly unforeseeable is not zero. But it is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one. In this investigation, those hidden missions step back into view. Apollo 1, Soyuz 1 and 11, Challenger, Columbia, and others that almost no one outside the programs remembers. The next chapters will reconstruct how they were supposed to work, how they actually failed, what was known beforehand, and what, even now, still isn't fully acknowledged. Why space kills. Framing the mystery to understand these missions, start with the most uncomfortable sentence in spaceflight. On paper, they were safe. By the time a crew straps in, the mission has been simulated thousands of times. NASA and its counterparts fill rooms with guidance experts, propulsion specialists, life support engineers. Every critical system is backed up. Then, backed up again. The chance of catastrophic loss, according to the models, is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the 1. And yet, Apollo 1 burned on the pad. Soyuz 1 hit the ground at highway speed when its parachutes refused to open. Soyuz 11's crew died in silence when a valve the size of a coin vented their air into vacuum. Challenger and Columbia disintegrated on live television. Missions that were supposed to be routine, even boring, became shorthand for horror. This is what we know. So what went wrong? The spectrum of answers runs from the mundane to the disturbing. At one end, random hardware failure, a parachute line tangling, an O-ring hardening in cold air, a valve cracking at the wrong moment in the wrong vibration mode. Move a little further, and the data begin to blur into human error under pressure. Checklist steps skipped, telemetry misread, a critical call delayed by 30 seconds. Then come the forces that never appear in the glossy launch broadcast. Political interference, budget cuts, schedules that could not slip without embarrassing a government. At the far end sits something darker. Deliberate risk-taking. Decisions made in conference rooms where leadership knew the trajectory might pass uncomfortably close to disaster, and signed off anyway. Soyuz 1 launched with over 200 known design problems. Challenger's engineers had warned for years about the booster seals. The part that matters is not that the risk was invisible. It was that the risk was, depending on who you ask, judged acceptable, inevitable, or simply easier to ignore. The people closest to the data saw it first. Flight controllers watching unexplained pressure drops on their consoles. Test engineers logging cracked O-rings and faulty parachute tests. Safety officers sitting through design reviews that ended with, "We'll fix it later," and knowing, from experience, that later rarely survives a launch date. This is what we don't. This investigation will separate what is solid from what is speculation. Official accident reports, declassified memos, survivor and insider testimony. The technical chain of events that turned minor anomalies into fatal cascades. First, the brutal environment itself. Vacuum, micrometeoroids, plasma sheaths. The small ways space tries to kill a spacecraft on every orbit. Then, the missions that never returned, reconstructed flight by flight. After that, the eerie aftermath, wreckage fields, recovered recordings, last words. Finally, the redesigns and new procedures that now shape every Moon, Mars, and commercial mission. On paper, each tragedy made the system smarter, safer, more cautious. But if the lessons truly took, why do the same patterns keep reappearing in different hardware, under different flags, decades apart? The void is not empty. how space tries to kill you, the patterns repeat because the environment has not changed. Space is still trying to kill every mission that enters it. Start with the part that sounds simple: nothing. The vacuum. In orbit or on the way to the moon, a spacecraft is a tiny bubble of pressure surrounded by an ocean of emptiness that will pull air through any leak, through any hairline crack, faster than a human can lose consciousness. Soyuz 11 proved that. A valve only a few millimeters across opened during module separation. The cabin vented in under a minute, and 3 cosmonauts died so quietly that controllers kept talking to them for several minutes, unaware they were already gone. Then there is temperature. Not cold in the winter sense. In sunlight, surfaces can climb above 120 degrees Celsius. In shadow, they can plunge below -150. Electronics, seals, and metal structures cycle through that over and over. Every orbit, every mission. A gasket that looks fine on the ground can harden, shrink, or crack in space and become the first link in a fatal chain. Outside the hull, micrometeoroids and debris race past faster than rifle bullets, on crossing trajectories that do not care about flight plans. The chance of a direct hit on a crew module is not 0, but it is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the 1. The problem is that the risk is spread over decades, over thousands of orbits and returns. Over enough time, low probability starts to look less reassuring. Re-entry is where the environment stops being indifferent and becomes actively violent. A capsule or shuttle slams into the upper atmosphere at Mach 25, wrapped in a sheath of plasma hot enough to melt steel. And all of that energy has to go somewhere predictable. If the angle is a few degrees too shallow, the object skips out, its trajectory bending back toward space. Too steep, and the air loads and heating spike, tearing at structure and tiles. Columbia's broken wing leading edge turned that margin into a countdown. To survive this, spacecraft are controlled explosions pretending to be vehicles. Under the crew, thousands of kilograms of propellant sit in thin-walled tanks, feeding combustion chambers that run as close to structural failure as engineers dare. The airframe around them is shaved down to save mass, yet somehow must survive launch loads, vacuum, micrometeoroid impacts, and the hammer blow of re-entry. Inside that fragile shell, life support systems fight a constant rearguard action. Fans and scrubbers keep carbon dioxide down. Valves separate vacuum from breathable air. Regulators hold cabin pressure and oxygen in a narrow band where human lungs still work. Heat shields and tiles must stay attached. Parachutes must fire in a precise sequence, at the right altitude, at the right speed. This is what we know. The best layperson analogy is not flattering. Imagine living inside a pressurized soda can, fired from a cannon, heated with a blowtorch, then slowed by a tangled web of ropes. If any one seal, hinge, or rope fails at the wrong moment, the entire system collapses. Apollo 1 never even left the pad. A spark in a high-pressure oxygen cabin turned the capsule into an oven, and a hatch that opened inward made escape impossible. Most missions succeed not because nothing goes wrong, but because thousands of small failures are caught, contained, or canceled out by other systems that happen to behave. What kills crews is usually not one catastrophic error. It is a chain of minor anomalies that line up in exactly the wrong order, under exactly the wrong political and schedule pressure. This is what we don't. How many near misses never made it into the public reports? When launch dates become non-negotiable, when budgets shrink, when inconvenient test data is reinterpreted as noise instead of warning, that fragile safety margin gets shaved down. The void stops being a backdrop and starts acting on the mission. The next tragedies in this story begin exactly there. Apollo 1. Fire on the launch pad that pressure had to land somewhere. On January 27, 1967, it landed on a white capsule sitting on Pad 34 at Cape Kennedy. Apollo 1 was not on a launch countdown. The rocket was inert, the mission weeks away. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were sealed into the command module for what NASA called a plugs-out test. A dress rehearsal to check that the spacecraft could run on its own power, with all external cables unplugged. Low risk. Routine, the kind of word NASA only uses when the alternative is worse. Inside the capsule, the environment was anything but routine. The cabin was pressurized with pure oxygen at more than 1 atmosphere, hotter and denser than normal air. Every surface was wrapped, padded, or wired. Miles of electrical harnesses, Velcro, nylon netting, checklists, and foam. Many of those materials had never been tested together in that atmosphere. Over the crew's heads, an inward opening hatch stacked under additional covers and latches meant that even in perfect conditions, it took more than a minute to get out. That was the design. This is what we know. The test started badly. Communications were noisy and intermittent, headsets cutting in and out. Grissom complained about a sour smell in the suit loop. Controllers scrubbed and reset portions of the test while the crew sat strapped in, suits pressurized, tempers rising with the cabin temperature. Hours went by. Then, at 6:31 p.m., the audio changed in a single breath. A shout about a fire. A burst of noise. Someone, likely Chaffee, calling, "We've got a fire in the cockpit." In the next seconds, a spark from damaged wiring or equipment under the couch met that oxygen-rich atmosphere and found something flammable. In normal air, it might have smoldered. Here, it did not smolder. In pure oxygen at elevated pressure, materials that barely char in open air burn with the intensity of liquid fuel. The fire raced across the cabin faster than human reflexes. Temperatures soared. Pressure inside the module spiked, bowing the hull outward and pinning the hatch shut even harder. Toxic gases and superheated air swept over the crew. Medical analysis later suggested they lost consciousness in under 20 seconds. Outside, pad workers ran toward the white capsule, fighting dense smoke and blinding heat. They struggled with the layered hatch, burning their hands through gloves, knowing exactly how long the mechanism took and how little time the crew had. By the time they forced it open, the interior was blackened and warped, wiring fused, suits charred where the fire had eaten its way up the cabin. The mission that was supposed to go to the moon had become an object lesson in how to die without ever leaving the pad. This is what we don't. How many engineers, months earlier, had already guessed the trajectory. Concerns about the hatch, about flammable materials, about that high-pressure oxygen. All logged, all noted, all outweighed by the race to beat the Soviets. The part that matters is what came next. For a moment, NASA treated Apollo 1 as a tragic outlier, a freak coincidence of wiring and timing. The chance of a repeat was not zero, but it was the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one. Except patterns do not care about optimism. The same habits, schedule over skepticism, confidence over caution, would quietly survive the fire. They would wait in the background of the program until the next mission and the next generation of crew crossed their path. Soyuz 1, the cosmonaut who knew he wouldn't return those habits, had a name in the Soviet program. They called it Soyuz. In April 1967, Vladimir Komarov climbed into Soyuz 1, knowing more about that spacecraft than almost anyone alive. He was a veteran cosmonaut, an engineer, and a close friend of Yuri Gagarin. He was also the man selected to fly the first crewed mission of a brand new vehicle that Soviet engineers had already flagged for more than 200 separate design and manufacturing flaws. This is what we know. Internal test reports described wiring that shorted, parachute systems that behaved unpredictably, thermal blankets that peeled, valves that stuck. The data kept coming. The launch date did not move. The Kremlin wanted a propaganda victory to counter Apollo, to prove that the USSR could still seize the initiative in space. Delay meant admitting weakness. Admitting weakness was not on the flight plan. Engineers pushed back. Some refused to sign off on the mission. Gagarin himself reportedly tried to intervene, filing objections, arguing that Soyuz 1's trajectory should remain hypothetical until the hardware matched the paperwork. Depending on who you ask, those warnings were ignored, overruled, or quietly removed from the record. On April 23rd, the mission launched from Baikonur into a gray dawn. Almost immediately, the spacecraft started confirming every fear. One of the two solar panels failed to deploy, cutting electrical power. Without that panel, the onboard systems began to starve. Attitude control sensors misbehaved, thrusters fired unpredictably. The capsule tumbled. From orbit, Komarov's voice stayed calm as he read out malfunction after malfunction, an inventory of an unraveling design. Ground control tried to salvage the flight. Multiple attempts to adjust the orbit failed when the attitude control system refused to hold a stable orientation. The mission profile, rendezvous, tests, a triumphant return, collapsed into a single priority: bring him home alive. The part that matters is that the final re-entry plan relied on a parachute system that had never been fully validated under real flight conditions. Test anomalies existed. They had been minimized, explained away as coincidence, as edge cases. Komarov fired the retro rockets and began his descent. The small drogue chute deployed. The main parachute did not. It stayed jammed in its container. The reserve chute tangled around it when triggered. Two systems now acting as one useless object. Soyuz 1 hit the ground at roughly 140 kilometers per hour and exploded. The force is so extreme that the recovery team found little more than a scorched shell and the remains of a man who, according to later accounts, had known the chance of survival was the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the 1. Publicly, the Soviet narrative was simple. A heroic cosmonaut lost in a tragic, unforeseeable accident. Privately, declassified documents and witness testimony now show a different pattern. Warnings buried, data softened, a rushed program that treated risk as a political inconvenience. Soyuz 1 should have been the definitive warning. It was not. 4 years later, another Soyuz crew would make it safely through launch, safely through re-entry burn, and die in a way no one had ever seen before. Not in fire or impact, but in the silence of space itself. Soyuz 11. The only humans to die in space, Soyuz 11 did not burn up. It did not break apart. From the outside, the mission looked perfect right up to the moment the capsule hit the ground. June 1971. The Soviet Union had just pulled off what looked, on paper, like a decisive win in the race for long-duration spaceflight. Soyuz 11 carried Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev to Salyut 1, the world's first space station. 23 days in orbit. A record. Their bodies adapted. Their systems held. The data seemed to prove that humans could live and work in space for weeks without catastrophic breakdown. It was the kind of success that made earlier warnings sound overcautious. The return sequence started out absolutely routine. Deorbit burn. Nominal. The service and orbital modules separated cleanly, leaving only the small descent module on a ballistic trajectory home. Ground controllers watched the numbers scroll in: attitude, rotation rates, deceleration through the upper atmosphere. There was the expected blackout as plasma wrapped around the falling capsule. No unexpected spikes, no erratic telemetry, no calls for help. This is what we know. The failure was already in progress. Hidden in the structure of the descent module was a pressure equalization valve, a small mechanical object meant to open only when the capsule was low in the atmosphere, letting outside air in so the crew could breathe without a sealed system. During separation, mechanical shock and design flaws conspired. The valve opened early, not at 10 kilometers. In vacuum, in that instant it stopped being a safety feature and became a hole to nowhere, a controlled leak turned uncontrolled, bleeding the cabin atmosphere into space. The physics are brutal and not at all cinematic. Cabin pressure plunged. The Soyuz design did not allow for pressure suits. 3 cosmonauts were crammed into a volume that barely fit them in shirt sleeves. At around 18,000 meters equivalent, fluid in the lungs begins to boil. Gas expands in the bloodstream, capillaries rupture. Loss of consciousness comes in roughly 15 seconds. Death follows within minutes. The part that matters is that there was no time for a checklist, no time for a last message, no heroic manual override. By the time the capsule hit thicker air, everyone inside was already gone. On the ground, the landing looked nominal. The parachutes deployed. The capsule was upright. Recovery teams moved in expecting the usual cramped, sweaty extraction and staged smiles for the cameras. They opened the hatch and found all 3 cosmonauts motionless, still strapped in, faces marked by dark bruising from hemorrhaging caused by decompression. Medical teams worked on them on the grass beside the capsule for nearly an hour. It did not matter. The Soviet announcement came quickly. The crew had died heroically during return. The exact mechanism stayed vague. No public discussion of a misrouted valve. No admission that the only humans ever to die in vacuum had done so because of a component the size of a fist. Over the years, as reports leaked and investigations were declassified, a clearer picture emerged. A valve placed where it could be jolted open. A design that assumed the cabin would always stay sealed until air was safe. A mission that had been flawless for weeks. Undone in under a minute. This is what we don't. Whether anyone in authority truly believed that flying 3 people without suits in a single-fault atmosphere system was acceptable, or whether the calculation was simply buried under politics and prestige. In space, there is no margin for breathable error. 1 valve, 1 line on a drawing, and the distance between record-setting mission and silent catastrophe collapses to seconds. By the early 1970s, both superpowers had buried crews lost to design decisions they should have caught. The next American disaster would not come from vacuum at all, but from a cold Florida morning, a rigid booster seal, and a decision to launch against the warnings of the very engineers paid to say no. Challenger, the disaster they saw coming. The warning signs were not hidden in some classified vault. They were written in frost. Morning of January 28, 1986, Challenger on pad 39B at Kennedy, breath steaming from the external tank. Ice crews walking under a vehicle never meant to launch in air this cold. In the crew cabin, Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher whose lesson was supposed to beam into classrooms across the country. On the ground, millions of students watching, told that space was now routine enough to schedule between math and lunch. It was not routine. Not for the hardware. The solid rocket boosters were built in segments, their joints sealed by rubber O-rings meant to compress under pressure and keep the flame inside. On earlier flights, those seals had already shown erosion, soot, blow by. The data was there, black streaks where there should have been clean metal. This is what we know. Engineers at Morton Thiokol had been tracking that erosion for years. and the colder the joint, the slower the rubber moved, the less it could seal before ignition pressure tried to pry the booster apart. The night before launch, those engineers tried to stop the mission. In a series of tense conference calls, Thiokol's technical team laid out charts: O-ring performance versus temperature, photos of damage, plots that showed the trajectory of risk plunging off a cliff below freezing. Their conclusion was blunt: do not launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The pad was far colder than that. Then the conversation changed. NASA managers pressed for justification, reminded Thiokol of schedules, backlogs, the political promise that the shuttle would fly often and cheaply. The call went on for hours. At one point, Thiokol's senior managers literally told the engineers to take off their engineering hats and put on their management hats. The part that matters is simple. The recommendation flipped. The launch was approved. From the public feed, the ascent looked perfect. Tower cleared, roll program, Challenger arcing out over the Atlantic on a bright, brutally clear morning. But at the base of the right booster, the cold O-ring never sealed. A thin tongue of flame slipped through the joint, became a growing jet against the external tank. 73 seconds after liftoff, the plume burned through struts and structure. The stack tore itself apart. In mission control, controllers heard. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. It was the kind of word NASA only uses when the alternative is worse. On their screens, parameters went from nominal to nonsense in less than a second. The orbiter did not explode in a Hollywood fireball. It disintegrated under aerodynamic loads. The crew cabin separated mostly intact, thrown on a doomed ballistic trajectory, subjected to forces and conditions no human could ride through to a safe return. Publicly, NASA talked about shock, about tragedy, about the inherent risk of space. Privately, the Rogers Commission went through the transcripts and charts and came back with something harsher. This was not an unforeseeable accident. It was the product of flawed decision-making, of a culture that had normalized deviance until damaged O-rings were treated as a coincidence rather than a countdown. Challenger became a pattern case. The engineers had raised explicit warnings. The data contradicted the launch criteria. Yet the mission flew because optimism, schedule pressure, and political stakes overruled the very discipline meant to keep crews alive. This is what we don't. How many near misses followed the same trajectory, buried in memos and meeting notes? The shuttle program would recover. Redesign joints and new safety offices in place. But the culture that trusted yesterday's luck to guarantee tomorrow's safety did not vanish. It went quiet, waited 17 years, and then met a different orbiter high over Texas. Columbia, foam, denial, and a doomed re-entry. Columbia was supposed to prove that the shuttle could still do quiet science while the headlines chased Mars and space stations. Instead, it proved something else. January 16, 2003, STS-107 rides a pillar of fire into orbit, not to dock with the IS, not to ferry crews, but to run a packed schedule of experiments in microgravity. No rendezvous, no safe harbor. As the cameras track the climb, one brief, ugly event flashes across the frame. A chunk of insulating foam breaks off the external tank and slams into the orbiter's left wing. It lasts less than a second. On the broadcast, it looks minor. Routine, forgettable, it wasn't. This is what we know. Foam had been shedding for years. Mission after mission, orange fragments broke loose and fell away, sometimes hitting the vehicle, sometimes not. Reports were written. Risk was accepted. The phrase in family got used a lot, a quiet way of saying, known issue, lived with before. On Columbia, the hit was different. The debris assessment team pulled the launch footage, froze the frame, measured the object, calculated the impact energy, and saw a trajectory that intersected the reinforced carbon-carbon panels along the wing's leading edge. That material was the shield against re-entry plasma. Punch a hole there, and the atmosphere doesn't just heat the surface, it goes inside. Engineers asked for more data. High-resolution imagery from military assets, better angles, something that could show whether the wing was cracked open or merely bruised. Managers pushed back. The foam was low density. Previous missions had survived. The chance of catastrophic damage was, depending on who you ask, either vanishingly small or simply too uncomfortable to quantify. One line of argument hardened. Even if there was a hole, there was no practical way to repair it in orbit and no shuttle ready to mount a quick rescue. Alerting the crew in that logic would only condemn them to die slowly. So Columbia's astronauts worked. They swapped experiments in mid-deck racks, recorded cheerful video messages, floated in front of experiment lockers that would later be found in fields. They knew foam had come off the tank. They did not know that some on the ground quietly feared their ride home was already compromised. The mission ran to timeline. The mood in public was normal. February 1st. Re-entry. Columbia rolls belly forward into the upper atmosphere, following a trajectory that dozens of shuttles had flown before. Minutes in, sensors in the left wing begin to show rising temperatures, then fail one by one. Structural strain readings spike. Ground controllers see odd data, then a flood of alarms. Debris starts to peel away, unseen in the dark over the Pacific. Crossing Texas, the orbiter comes apart, scattering wreckage, experiments, and classified hardware across hundreds of miles. Post-disaster tests at NASA's ballistic range-fire superheated plasma through a mock-up wing with a foam-created hole. The panel fails exactly as feared. The part that matters is brutal. The scenario had been modeled before re-entry. It was not unimaginable. It was merely judged improbable enough to proceed. The chance is not zero, but it is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one. Investigators found more than a hole in a wing. They found a culture that treated the shuttle as a mature system, where repeated anomalies became background noise, where unexplained was the kind of word NASA only uses when the alternative is worse. Foam loss was normalized. Rescue plans were theoretical. It became easier to assume the best than confront the worst. Columbia forced a reckoning that would eventually end the shuttle program. But the story does not stop with NASA. Commercial launch providers, lunar landers, Mars transfer vehicles now trace their own trajectories through the same trade space between ambition and risk, inheriting procedures, software, and unspoken habits from the shuttle era. This is what we don't. Which of those habits will only be recognized as lethal in hindsight, written not in memos, but in wreckage on some future return? And somewhere in the planning documents for those next missions, there are already edge cases, already foam-sized warnings, waiting to see who blinks first. Patterns in the wreckage. What all these disasters share put Apollo 1, Soyuz 1, Soyuz 11, Challenger, and Columbia on the same table. Different flags, different hardware, different decades. The wreckage tells one story. This is what we know. None of them were truly unexpected, not from the inside. Apollo 1's capsule was lined with flammable material, pressurized with pure oxygen, sealed with an inward opening hatch that might as well have been a welded plate. Soyuz 1 rolled out with more than 200 documented defects. Vladimir Komarov flew it anyway, because the launch date served politics, not physics. Challenger's O-rings had already shown erosion at low temperature. Columbia had been hit by foam on almost every mission before 107. In each case, the disaster started long before the countdown. Pattern 1. Known issues. Flown anyway. The data existed. The risk was not zero, but it was the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one, and that made it feel safe enough to ignore. Pattern 2 sits behind that. Pressure. For Apollo and Soyuz, it was the Cold War. The race to plant flags on the moon and in orbit before the other superpower could claim the high ground. For the shuttle, it was flight rate promises, commercial satellites waiting on the manifest, school teachers scheduled to speak from orbit. Delays meant angry legislators, cut funding, headlines about failure. So the trajectory bent, quietly, toward launch at all costs. Then comes the third pattern, the communication break between the engineers who see the raw data and the managers who sign the flight readiness review. Concerns get translated, softened, averaged into charts. Catastrophic becomes unlikely. Unsafe becomes acceptable with mitigation. The part that matters is how, step by tiny step, the language changes faster than the hardware. And under all of it, the fourth pattern, normalization of deviance. A valve sticks but the mission survives. Foam sheds but the shuttle returns. An O-ring chars but does not fail completely. Each near miss is reclassified as proof of robustness instead of a warning shot. The anomaly becomes routine, until the day it does exactly what it was always capable of. The human cost does not end at the crew. Controllers who heard Soyuz 11's last, perfectly normal call then watched the capsule land nominal, walked out to greet 3 dead men. Recovery teams opened hatches expecting handshakes and found silence. Shuttle engineers spent the rest of their careers replaying meetings, one sentence at a time, searching for the moment they might have stopped the trajectory. This is what we don't, whether those patterns are truly broken or just renamed. The next vehicle, depending on who you ask, is safer, smarter, more autonomous, or it is the same story with new acronyms. Before moving on to those future missions, pause here. Stay in the aftermath, in the charred switches, the torn suits, the last words on tape. The wreckage is not just debris. It is the only honest transcript of what really happened in space. Last words, black boxes, and ghosts in the data the wreckage talks. But not in a human voice. Every major space disaster leaves behind 2 parallel fields of debris. One is twisted metal, torn suits, scorched panels scattered across deserts, oceans, and remote forests. The other is invisible. Voice recordings, biomedical telemetry, pressure curves, temperature spikes, circuit voltages. Streams of data that simply stop, frozen at the exact moment the mission's trajectory crossed the point of no return. This is what we know. Apollo 1 never left the pad, but the tapes did not care. The loop in mission control captured garbled calls, rising confusion, then raw panic as fire raced through a pure oxygen cabin. Voices overlapping, someone shouting about fire in the cockpit, then distortion, then a harsh carrier tone. The last words are still debated. The silence that follows is not. For Challenger, the end arrived faster than most people remember. To television audiences, the shuttle became a blooming white cloud. On the internal channels, the final seconds are mostly routine callouts, a normal ascent, a normal mission. Then a burst of noise and static as the stack disintegrates, the data stream fragmenting into nonsense values as sensors shear away. The crew cabin survives the breakup, but the recorders never capture screaming or goodbyes. The part that matters is brutally simple. Acceleration goes to 0, then negative, then nothing. Columbia dies more slowly, and the data shows it. Rising temperatures buried in the left wing, sensor after sensor dropping offline in a pattern that, once plotted, traces the path of superheated plasma forcing its way inside the structure. On the voice loop, calm checklists give way to brief confusion as controllers lose tire pressure readings. Then, hydraulics. There is no cinematic last speech. Just a clipped acknowledgement, a half-finished call, and a carrier that cuts out over Texas. Investigators rebuild those final minutes the way archaeologists rebuild a shattered statue. Audio is synchronized with telemetry, millisecond by millisecond. Debris fields hundreds of kilometers long are mapped, each object tagged by impact location and scorch pattern to reconstruct the breakup sequence. A bent strut here means the load came from the wrong direction. A panel charred on one edge means the plasma entered earlier than expected. from a burned wire or a cracked valve, an entire chain of failure is inferred backwards to its first, almost invisible deviation. Someone has to listen to all of it. Engineers, flight surgeons, controllers, many of them friends of the dead, sit in small rooms replaying the last heartbeats, last breaths, last words. They count how many seconds the crew might have remained conscious. They note when cabin pressure crosses the line where blood boils. They write reports knowing that depending on who you ask, those reports are either acts of respect or autopsies on colleagues who trusted them. Myths grow in the gaps, long, agonizing deaths, frantic radio calls, secret recordings. The data pushes back. Soyuz 11's crew died in silence when a valve opened in vacuum. Their heart monitors flatlined in under a minute. Challenger's crew probably survived the breakup, but lost consciousness when the cabin lost pressure. Columbia's astronauts likely had seconds of awareness as alarms cascaded. Not instant, not drawn-out horror. Something in between. Those ghosts in the data forced change. Apollo 1's fire led to redesigned hatches, non-flammable materials, different cabin atmospheres. Challenger's telemetry rewrote launch criteria, booster design, and how NASA handles descent. Columbia's scattered sensors gave birth to on-orbit inspection, repair plans, and pressure suits worn during ascent and re-entry, so that if the worst happens, the crew has at least a chance. The chance is not zero, but it is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one. All of this pain, all of this analysis, was supposed to buy a safer path outward, to the moon, to Mars, to whatever waits in deep space. The data is there, archived, waiting, a warning encoded in every failure curve and final heartbeat. As new players rush to orbit and beyond, private rockets and national programs racing to plant flags on distant worlds, one question hangs over every launch. Are they really listening to those silent voices from missions that never returned? Or are those ghosts about to be ignored all over again? From tombs to testbeds, how tragedy rewired spaceflight. Those ghosts did not just haunt control rooms. They rewrote the hardware. Apollo 1 turned a spacecraft into a furnace in seconds. The Apollo 204 review board traced it, line by line, through the data. A pure oxygen cabin at high pressure, flammable Velcro and wiring. A hatch that opened inward so slowly the crew never had a chance. The part that matters is what happened next. Apollo switched to non-flammable materials, to mixed gas atmospheres closer to sea level, to outward opening, quick release hatches that could be blown in an emergency. The command module did not just get safer. It became a test bed for the idea that no single spark should be able to kill a crew by itself. On the Soviet side, Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11 carved the same lesson into metal. Komarov's parachute never fully deployed. Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev died when a valve cracked open during module separation, venting the cabin to vacuum in seconds. Soviet commissions quietly rewrote the design. Parachute systems gained redundancy. Valves were redesigned and shielded, and re-entry without pressure suits was banned. From then on, cosmonauts came home wearing their own miniaturized spacecraft, zipped and sealed around their bodies. Then came Challenger. The Rogers Commission did not just point at an O-ring and call it a day. It documented a culture where launch schedules overruled engineering warnings, where acceptable risk meant flying through temperatures the hardware had never really survived. It forced NASA to stand up independent safety offices, to formalize anonymous reporting, to treat prove it's safe as the starting point for a crewed mission, not an optional hurdle. Columbia's Accident Investigation Board doubled down, tracing foam strike data, ignored anomalies, and institutional blind spots. This is what we know. The shuttle that returned was flown under a completely different set of launch rules, inspection regimes, and abort criteria than the shuttle that broke apart. Out of that came a harder doctrine: fail safe and fault tolerant, or do not fly. Capsules grew escape towers and integrated launch abort systems designed to yank crews away from a failing booster in milliseconds. Parachute stacks multiplied with multiple independent canopies and sensors, so that one bad line or frozen valve would no longer write an epitaph. Sensors and computers were duplicated and triplicated, their data cross-checked in real time. The chance of every layer failing at once is not zero, but it is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one. Modern spacecraft are the visible result. SpaceX's Crew Dragon carries a launch escape system built into its sidewalls, automated docking that can wave off if relative velocity or distance readings go strange, and heat shields sized with Columbia's debris fields in mind. Boeing's Starliner and NASA's Orion follow the same logic. Assume the mission will go wrong somewhere along the trajectory. Then, design abort modes that bend but do not break. Return paths can be reshaped, burns skipped, landings diverted, and the crew still survives. Behind that hardware sits a quieter change. Independent safety offices with real authority can now stop a countdown. Engineers can file concerns through anonymous channels without betting their careers. Unexplained anomaly has become the kind of word NASA only uses when the alternative is worse, because those words now trigger reviews, not shrugs. This is what we don't. Whether every new player in orbit, every private launch provider, has truly absorbed that shift from silence to speaking up. Even with all of it, no system is perfect. No design can erase the fact that space is trying to kill the crew every second. The realistic goal is brutal and simple. No single valve, no single tile, no single piece of foam or stray object should be able to end a mission on its own. That standard has held mostly in low Earth orbit, where a crippled spacecraft can sometimes limp home in hours. But Artemis and the new wave of Mars talk are about to push crews back into deep space, far beyond quick rescue, into distances where an unexplained failure on the wrong day means there is no return. The next question is not just how safe the vehicles are. It is what happens when something follows them into that darkness and the abort modes run out. The next frontier. Will we repeat the same mistakes? It is what happens when something follows them into that darkness and the abort modes run out. Because that is not science fiction. That is the plan. Right now, Artemis missions are lining up on the manifest. Private companies are test-firing skyscraper-sized rockets. And there is serious talk of a crewed Mars mission leaving Earth before today's middle schoolers hit retirement. All of it under clocks that are political, financial, and very public. Schedules announced on podiums long before the hardware has finished its first shakedown. This is what we know. The pattern is familiar. Apollo 1 launched on paper before its capsule was truly safe. Soyuz 1 flew with more than 200 known design issues because delay was unacceptable. Challenger and Columbia launched into warning data that had been normalized into background noise. Ambitious timelines first. Fully tested systems later. The part that matters is that nothing about Artemis or commercial space magically cancels that human habit. When a lunar lander slips a year, investors get nervous, senators start calling, and managers hear the same subtle message their predecessors did. Make the risk sound manageable. Not gone. Just manageable. So hardware flies with accepted anomalies. Valves that have stuck but not failed. Software patches that cleared the last sim but have not faced the real radiation environment. Heat shield chart patterns that do not match the model but are filed under unexplained with a straight face, which is the kind of word NASA only uses when the alternative is worse. Commercial space adds another twist. Rapid iteration. Move fast. Blow up prototypes. Learn, rebuild for uncrewed test articles. That culture is brutally effective. A spectacular pad explosion becomes a lessons learned reel and a meme. But strap 4 people into that same vehicle and the calculus changes. A rapid, unscheduled disassembly stops being quirky engineering slang and becomes a national funeral. Deep space does not forgive that disconnect. A Soyuz 11-style valve failure on a Mars transit is not a 30-second tragedy on the way down. It is a slow, unfixable leak months from home. In a vehicle whose life support system was signed off despite minor anomalies because turning back would have cost too much. A Columbia-style impact on a lunar transfer stage is not something ground crews can inspect with a camera boom. It is a silent countdown no one can stop. This is what we don't. Whether the first Mars transit vehicle ends its mission as a monument in solar orbit, its crew memorialized while root causes trace back to the same quiet pressures, the same denial, the same normalized deviance that killed Apollo, Soyuz, and shuttle crews. Pattern interrupt. Imagine the opposite trajectory. A culture where every near miss is treated as a fatal accident that just got lucky. Where launch dates move when data looks wrong. Where the most pessimistic engineer in the room is heard as clearly as the most enthusiastic program manager. Whether that future wins is, depending on who you ask, Up to NASA, up to the companies, or up to something larger? The next section asks a harder version of that question: how much danger the public is actually willing to fund, to tolerate, and to ignore when the countdown reaches zero. Why these lost crews still matter. And what happens next, the harder question, is simpler than it sounds. What happens next? And who decides how much danger is acceptable when the hatch closes? This is what we know. The trajectory to that question runs straight through the missions that never returned. Apollo 1's fire and a pure oxygen capsule that turned a test into a furnace. Soyuz 1, launched with over 200 known faults, ending with Komarov's capsule hitting Earth hard enough to leave almost nothing recognizable. Soyuz 11, where the crew died in silence as a valve bled their air away during re-entry. Challenger, torn apart in full view of the world after engineers warned the O-rings would not seal in the cold. Columbia, where foam damage was seen on ascent, analyzed, then effectively wished away until the shuttle disintegrated over Texas. Different rockets, different flags, the same pattern. Rushed schedules, political pressure, managers treating risk as a negotiable line item instead of a hard wall. The part that matters is brutal. Space does not bargain. The void does not care about launch windows, TV ratings, or budget cycles. When institutions bluff, it is always the crew that pays first. Those crews were not lost in isolation. Each impact carved new rules into metal and procedure. Apollo 1 rewrote spacecraft atmospheres, wiring standards, and escape systems. Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11 forced redesigns of parachutes, valves, and the decision to keep crews in pressure suits. Challenger created an independent safety office and a culture that, for a while, listened to the most pessimistic engineer in the room. Columbia hardened ascent imaging, debris tracking, and the expectation that unexplained damage must be treated as mortal until the data prove otherwise. Their last minutes now live in checklists. In design reviews, in those quiet, tense meetings where someone points to a line of telemetry and says, "Stop." The chance of repeating their exact failures is not zero, but it is the kind of number you write with a lot of zeros in front of the one. Here is what often gets missed. Viewers are not just spectators. Taxpayers sign the checks. Voters set the incentives. Customers choose which launch providers thrive. Fans of spaceflight amplify which missions dominate the conversation. Public attention makes it harder for NASA or any company to bury a concern in an appendix, or wave away an odd object on a distant trajectory as coincidence without evidence. This is what we don't. Whether the next fatal shortcut has already been taken on a drawing board somewhere. That uncertainty is exactly why scrutiny matters. So the constructive version of this is simple. Follow the investigation reports when anomalies occur. Reward programs that publish data, admit doubt, and delay launches when safety engineers look uncomfortable. Be suspicious when spectacle arrives faster than safety reviews. And if deeper dives into the hidden history behind famous missions are useful, subscribe, stay in this loop, and keep asking the impolite questions. Because those missions that never returned are still out there in a sense, etched into every weld, every software line, every no-go call that holds a countdown. If the reasons they were lost are remembered clearly, the next generation has a better chance of coming home. Somewhere, on a launch pad, not too many years from now, another crew will climb into a spacecraft and trust that enough was learned from the ones who did not. Whether that trust is justified will not be an accident.